The congressional hearing room felt tight, like the air had thickened with tension before anyone even spoke. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Outside the Capitol, thousands of people shouted in unison. Their chants echoed through the marble halls, filling every corner with restless energy. It was a storm of voices, nurses, teachers, veterans, all holding signs, asking to be heard. Inside, at the long wooden table, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene sat with her arms folded and her chin tilted high. Her face was already flushed, eyes sharp like she was ready for battle. She had been waiting for this, and when the microphone light turned red, she leaned in, her voice slicing through the air. "Those people out there are not patriots," she said, her Georgia accent firm and heavy. "Real Americans," she continued, "don't scream, don't block doors, and don't disturb the peace of Congress. They're disrespecting this institution. They're disrespecting the flag. They're disrespecting every veteran who ever fought for this country." Her words got louder, faster. "They are paid agitators, probably funded by George Soros or some radical billionaire. We need them cleared out now." Several Republican members nodded, clapping quietly. Cameras caught their smiles. They thought this was a winning moment. In the back, staffers smirked, already imagining how this would look on the evening news. But 4 seats away, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat still, calm, quiet, and laser-focused. Her navy blue suit looked crisp under the bright lights. Her hands rested neatly on a folder. She didn't move, didn't roll her eyes, didn't interrupt. She just listened, waiting. Jasmine Crockett, former civil rights attorney from Dallas, had spent 15 years learning when to stay silent and when to strike. This, right here, was her moment. The chairman started to move on to the next item, but Jasmine raised her hand gently. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I'd like to respond to my colleague's remarks." The chairman hesitated. He knew this would change the energy in the room, but with TV cameras rolling and reporters leaning forward, there was no turning back. He nodded. "The chair recognizes Representative Crockett from Texas." Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward too, a smirk forming on her face. This was exactly what she wanted. A fight. She thrived on confrontation. She'd built her brand on it, but she didn't realize who she was facing. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone slowly. She took a breath, giving the moment time to build. When she spoke, her tone was calm in a way that made everyone listen closer. "Representative Greene," she began, her voice smooth and clear, "just so I understand you correctly, you said that the people outside are not patriots, that they're disrespecting our institutions, that they should be removed by law enforcement. Is that accurate?" Greene smiled confidently. "That's exactly right. They're disrupting Congress. They're breaking the peace." Jasmine nodded slightly. "So you believe that American citizens, gathering peacefully to petition their government, which is their constitutional right, should be forcibly removed because their presence makes you uncomfortable?" The room stirred. Even some Republican aides looked up. Crockett had reframed the entire issue in one clean sentence. Greene hesitated. "They're not peaceful. They're yelling. They're blocking sidewalks. Have they committed any violence?" Crockett asked, still calm. "No, but have they damaged property?" "Well, not exactly, but they're disruptive. Have they stopped anyone from entering or leaving this building?" Greene blinked. "You're twisting my words. I'm talking about the disruption." Crockett leaned slightly closer. "You're talking about speech, Representative Greene. You're talking about American citizens using their voices, to express opinions to their elected officials. That's not disruption. That's democracy." The room went silent. You could almost hear the hum of the cameras. Every person in that room knew something big was unfolding. Crockett continued, her words steady and deliberate. "Let me read something to you," she said, pulling a small paper from her folder. "This is the First Amendment to the United States Constitution." She read slowly, every word ringing clear. "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. She looked up. That's not a suggestion, Representative Greene. That's not a privilege. It's a right. Those protesters outside are exercising it. Greene's mouth tightened. They're being disruptive, she said again, her voice shaky now. So was the Boston Tea Party, Crockett replied. Her tone was still even, but the fire was visible in her eyes. So were the suffragettes who chained themselves to fences to win the right to vote. So were the civil rights marchers who faced dogs and fire hoses. Disruption, she said, is what happens when people who have been ignored decide not to be silent anymore. The room buzzed. Crockett's examples cut deep. History itself standing behind her words. Greene looked flustered. But Crockett wasn't done. She reached for another sheet of paper. Representative Greene, she said softly, I reviewed your social media posts from January 5th to January 8th, 2021. Would you like me to read a few? Greene's confidence flickered. That's not relevant. Oh, I think it is, Crockett said. On January 5th, you wrote, Tomorrow is our 1776 moment. On January 6th, while the Capitol was under attack, you posted, These are patriots fighting for their country. And after police officers were beaten and people died, you called those rioters political prisoners. Gasps spread through the room. Reporters typed furiously. The chairman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So, Crockett continued, when people storm the Capitol, break windows, assault police, and try to overturn an election, they're patriots? Her voice rose just slightly, her words cutting clean. But when citizens stand peacefully outside holding signs about schools and health care, they're an unpatriotic mob? Greene's mouth opened, but no words came. The tension was thick. No one moved. Crockett pressed forward, her calm returning. Representative Greene, you don't believe in free speech. You believe in agreeable speech, speech that fits your view of the world. But the Constitution doesn't work that way. It protects all speech, especially the speech we dislike. She paused and glanced at the audience. The First Amendment doesn't have a footnote that says, only when Marjorie Taylor Greene approves. That line hit like thunder. Some members stifled smiles. Others stared in disbelief. Greene tried to recover, stammering, There's a right way and a wrong way to protest. Crockett's voice turned firm. No. What you mean is there's your way. And the wrong way. But that's not how democracy works. She leaned closer. The Constitution doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. For a moment, no one breathed. It felt like history was being written right there in that hearing room. Crockett lowered her papers, her voice soft but strong. Representative Greene, the people outside aren't disrespecting America. They are reminding America who it belongs to. Every camera zoomed in. Every reporter's fingers flew across their keyboards. Greene sat frozen, her once confident smirk gone. And then Jasmine Crockett added one final line before the break that made the room erupt in whispers. She said, If standing up for your country makes you unpatriotic in your eyes, Representative Greene, then maybe you need to rethink what patriotism really means. The entire room went silent. Not one word from Greene, not one sound. From the other members only the faint echo of protest chants outside, growing louder, stronger, prouder, because out there, thousands of people were still shouting for the same thing. Jasmine had just defended inside their right to be heard. And what Jasmine Crockett said next would shake Congress even harder. The air inside, that hearing room felt like static. Everyone sensed something was about to happen, something they'd remember. You could hear camera shutters clicking, pens tapping, and the faint echo of chanting still floating in from outside. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned closer to the microphone and said in a calm, steady tone, Representative Greene, since you mentioned veterans, let's talk about who these protesters really are. She lifted a few sheets of paper from her folder. These are names of people standing outside in the heat right now. People you just called unpatriotic. Her eyes never left Greene's face. James Martinez, she read. 73 years old. Vietnam veteran. 3 tours. He's protesting cuts to VA healthcare. A ripple went through the crowd. Reporters looked up from their screens. Sharon Williams, Crockett continued. Gold Star mother. Her son died in Afghanistan. She's asking Congress to protect veterans' families. She turned the page. Marcus Thompson, Iraq War veteran. Lost both legs in Fallujah. He's asking for fair disability benefits. Jasmine paused, letting the silence hang. These are the unpatriotic Americans you want removed by force? The words struck hard. Even the chairman's face tightened. Greene sat stiffly, her eyes darting toward the cameras. Crockett's tone softened. Not angry, just honest. These people fought for the same flag you say they're disrespecting. They carried it through jungles, deserts, and battlefields. And now they're standing peacefully outside asking this government to take care of them. You call that disrespect? A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. Even a few aides on the Republican side looked down. Jasmine went on. And since you mentioned George Soros, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, I want to clear something up. She held up a folder filled with printed documents. These are the official protest permits, filed by the National Education Association, the American Healthcare Association, and Veterans for Better Benefits. All American groups. All fully transparent. All within the law. She flipped through the papers. No secret billionaire funding. No conspiracies. Just ordinary Americans trying to be heard. Her voice grew firmer. But you couldn't just disagree with them. You had to question their motives, their funding, even their right to speak. That's not patriotism. That's fear. The entire committee room was silent again. No whispers, no laughter, no movement. The kind of silence that means everyone is holding their breath. Marjorie Taylor Greene shifted in her seat, trying to find her usual rhythm, but it was gone. She had no lines left. No interruptions that could save her. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked at Greene the way a teacher looks at a student who finally realizes they haven't done their homework. Representative Greene, Jasmine said quietly. The Constitution doesn't exist to protect the powerful from being criticized. It exists to protect the powerless from being silenced. That line hit like a wave. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards. You could almost see the headline forming. Crockett schools Greene on the Constitution. Still, Jasmine wasn't finished. She took another breath and continued, her tone deepening with emotion. When I was a civil rights attorney, she said, I learned something important. The Constitution matters most when it's uncomfortable. When it protects people we don't agree with. When it defends the words we don't want to hear. Her voice grew softer, almost reflective. If the First Amendment only protected popular speech, we wouldn't need it. It exists because democracy is loud, messy, and inconvenient. That's the point, she turned toward the chairman. Mr. Chairman, those voices outside aren't threats to democracy. They are democracy. The room erupted in quiet gasps. Even the camera operators froze, knowing they were capturing a defining moment. Greene tried to interject again. You're twisting things, Jasmine. But Crockett cut her off gently. No, Representative Greene. I'm clarifying things. She leaned forward, steady and unshaken. You called them unpatriotic. But they're the reason this building exists. You and I sit here because generations before us refused to stay silent. For a long second, no one moved. Crockett's calmness was power. Greene's silence was defeat. Then Jasmine added softly, You know what's truly unpatriotic? Using your power to silence the people who gave you that power. The words seemed to freeze time. Even the air felt still. One of the reporters whispered, Wow, under their breath. It was all caught on the microphones. The chairman finally cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Order, he said weakly. We need to proceed. But no one cared about the schedule anymore. The entire hearing had shifted. This wasn't about bills or budgets now. This was about truth. Outside, the chants grew louder again, echoing through the windows. Listen to us. Listen to us. And in that room, Jasmine Crockett had done exactly that. Listened, defended, and reminded everyone what those voices meant. A reporter from CNN whispered to her colleague, "She just made history." Another from NBC muttered, "This is going viral tonight." Meanwhile, Greene sat still, staring at her desk. Her earlier confidence was gone. She looked small now, not because Jasmine humiliated her, but because Jasmine held up a mirror, and what that mirror showed was undeniable. Crockett looked around the room once more. "Representative Greene," she said quietly, "when you question the patriotism of Americans who simply ask to be heard, you're not defending democracy. You're defining who gets to be part of it. And that," she paused, "isn't your right." Her words hung heavy in the air. Even the chairman seemed hesitant to speak. He shuffled his notes, trying to break the silence. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. She turned slightly toward the cameras. "I want the people watching at home to remember this," she said. "The right to protest isn't left or right. It isn't red or blue. It's American. And anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to take something from you. Your voice." The audience behind her started to clap softly before the chairman could stop them. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the moment unforgettable. Crockett took a sip of water, her composure never breaking. Meanwhile, Greene fidgeted with her papers, pretending to read them, avoiding every camera that pointed her way. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the exchange were already spreading. Tweets read, "Jasmine Crockett schools Greene on live TV." Another said, "The First Amendment just found its fiercest defender." But Jasmine didn't seem to care about going viral. She sat back, calm again, like she'd done exactly what she came to do. The chairman tried to move on. "We will now proceed to—" But suddenly, a loud cheer broke from outside. Everyone turned toward the sound. Through the window, you could see the protesters waving flags and signs, cheering, chanting louder than ever. Jasmine smiled slightly. She didn't need to say a word. The people outside had heard her, and she had heard them. As the noise echoed, Greene finally leaned into her mic. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "Turn those people off." But before she could continue, Jasmine spoke again. Softly but firmly, "You can't turn off the American people, Representative. Not today." A stunned silence filled the room again. It was the kind of silence that meant something had changed. Jasmine gathered her papers slowly, sliding them back into her folder. Her movements were calm, controlled. Every camera followed her hands, even in silence. She commanded attention. Finally, she looked up, straight at Greene. Her tone was steady but final. "You talk about law and order, Representative Greene," she said. "But law and order mean nothing without justice. And justice begins with the truth." The chairman tried again to regain control. "We'll take a short recess." But nobody moved right away. Everyone in that room, every reporter, every aide, every member, was still absorbing what had just happened. As people finally began to rise from their seats, Greene looked shaken. She reached for her phone, scrolling through incoming messages that were already flooding in. One staffer whispered, "This clip's already everywhere." Jasmine stood and adjusted her jacket, her posture tall and graceful. She walked toward the door without another word. But before stepping out, she turned back and glanced once more at the committee table. Her eyes met Greene's. No anger, no pride. Just quiet conviction. And then she said, "We'll see what the American people think about patriotism when they hear this tonight." The reporters followed her out, shouting questions, their voices bouncing down the marble corridor. Inside, Greene stayed seated alone at the table, staring blankly at the papers in front of her. Outside, the crowd was roaring now, their signs lifted high, their chants rising stronger than before. They had heard every word Jasmine Crockett said, and it gave them hope. But no one in that building, not even Jasmine herself, knew that the fallout from this hearing would grow far beyond the Capitol. Walls it would reach, homes across America, spark new debates, and make millions rethink what patriotism really means. And the next morning, something happened that made the story explode even more. Every major news network opened with it. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News couldn't ignore it. The video of Jasmine Crockett's takedown of Marjorie Taylor Greene had been viewed more than 3 million times overnight. By morning, it crossed 10. Clips flooded Facebook feeds and YouTube. Recommendations. People shared it in family chats. Grandparents sent it to their kids. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Veterans reposted it with proud comments like, "That's what real representation looks like." In small towns and big cities, people were talking about it. It wasn't just a political moment anymore. It had become a national conversation about what patriotism really meant. Jasmine Crockett woke up to hundreds of messages. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Some were from journalists asking for interviews, others were from veterans thanking her for defending them. One message simply said, "You reminded me that my voice still matters. Thank you." She sat quietly in her Dallas apartment, coffee in hand, scrolling through the flood of reactions. She wasn't smiling or celebrating. She just looked thoughtful, maybe even a little tired, because she knew what she'd said wasn't about going viral. It was about truth. Meanwhile, inside Congress, the fallout had already begun. Reporters swarmed the hallways. Members of both parties were cornered with questions. "Do you agree with what Representative Greene said? What did you think of Representative Crockett's response?" Some Republican members avoided the cameras completely. Others gave short, nervous statements like, "We respect all voices. Democrats, on the other hand, were open." One called Jasmine's speech a constitutional masterclass. Another said, "It's about time someone reminded us what that First Amendment really means." Marjorie Taylor Greene, however, stayed quiet. No press conferences, no tweets. For almost 24 hours, nothing. But when she finally broke her silence, her response only made things worse. She posted a message online that read, "Fake news twisting my words again. I was only defending law and order." Within minutes, the replies poured in. People attached clips of Jasmine reading Greene's own tweets from January 6th. Others shared quotes from the hearing itself. One veteran replied, "Law and order starts with honesty." By noon, "Crockett destroys Greene" was the #1 trend in the country. Back in Texas, local radio hosts talked about it nonstop. Callers phoned in from across the state. One elderly man said, "I fought in Vietnam. What she said about us, that hit home. We're not unpatriotic for asking for help. We're Americans." Another woman said softly, "I've never felt proud watching Congress until that moment." Jasmine Crockett spoke for all of us. Even talk shows picked it up. Morning hosts replayed the moment when Jasmine said, "Those people outside aren't disrupting democracy. They are democracy." The studio audiences applauded, but what truly made the moment powerful wasn't just Jasmine's words. It was how ordinary people reacted. In small towns, veterans began organizing peaceful rallies to thank her. In schools, civics teachers used her speech to explain the First Amendment. And outside the Capitol, the same protesters who had been called unpatriotic returned, this time with even bigger crowds. Their signs read, "We are democracy." Others said, "Our voices matter." And one man, standing in a wheelchair holding a flag, had a sign that simply read, "Thank you, Jasmine." That man was James Martinez, the 73-year-old veteran Jasmine had mentioned during the hearing. A CNN reporter found him in the crowd. He spoke slowly, his voice trembling. "I served 3 tours in Vietnam," he said. "I never expected a member of Congress to speak up for us like that." She reminded the world what we fought for, the right to speak. His words spread across social media just as quickly as Jasmine's speech had. People shared the clip with captions like, "This is what patriotism looks like." Back inside the Capitol, Greene was facing growing pressure. Even members of her own party were distancing themselves. One Republican senator told reporters, "Peaceful protest is an American right. We may not agree with every message, but we defend their right to say it. within 2 days. The House Ethics Committee quietly announced it would review Greene's comments. The investigation didn't lead to punishment, but it sent a message loud and clear. Even in a divided Congress, attacking the First Amendment was a line too far. When Jasmine heard about the review, she didn't celebrate. She just sighed and said to a reporter, "I'm not interested in punishing anyone. I just want everyone, in power or not, to remember what we stand for." That quote ended up printed in newspapers nationwide. Days later, Jasmine returned home to her district in Dallas for a community event. The auditorium was packed. Teachers, parents, veterans, young. Students. They all wanted to hear her speak. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose to their feet. It wasn't the loud, political kind of applause. It was warm, grateful, human, the kind that said, "Thank you for standing up for us." She smiled humbly. "Please, sit down," she said softly. She waited until the room grew quiet. Then she spoke. "Those protesters outside the Capitol last week weren't there for me to defend," she said. "They were there defending themselves. I just reminded everyone that using your voice isn't un-American. Silencing it is." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. Some people stood with tears in their eyes, others just nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in their hearts. One older man near the front, a veteran, raised his hand. "Ma'am," he said, "I never thought I'd see the day when someone in Congress reminded us that the Constitution still means something. You did that." "Thank you." Jasmine's eyes softened. She stepped closer to the microphone. "Sir," she said gently, "thank you. Because people like you, people who still care, are the reason democracy survives." The audience broke into applause again. It lasted a long time. After the event ended, people lined up to shake her hand. Some just wanted to say thank you. Others wanted to tell her their own stories about being ignored, dismissed, or silenced. She listened to every one of them. Later that evening, as the sun set over Dallas, Jasmine sat in her car for a moment before driving home. She looked out at the people leaving the event, smiling, holding signs, talking to each other, and she thought about how powerful one simple thing could be: the human voice. No matter how loud the noise gets in politics, no matter how deep the divisions, the truth always starts with someone brave enough to speak up, and that's what she had done. By the following week, professors were assigning her speech in university law classes. Legal scholars called it a living example of constitutional literacy. Civil rights groups shared it as a teaching tool, and everyday Americans kept replaying it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. One editorial in the Washington Post summed it up perfectly. Crockett didn't just defend protesters. She defended the American promise that government belongs to the governed. As the weeks passed, Jasmine moved on to new hearings, new causes, but something had changed in the air. Every time she spoke now, the room listened a little closer. Every time she mentioned the Constitution, people leaned in because they remembered. They remembered how one calm, steady voice had reminded Congress and the country what those old words in that old document truly meant. And in homes across America, people were still sharing her speech, still talking about it at dinner tables, still feeling a quiet kind of pride. Not political pride, human pride. The kind that says, we can disagree, but we all belong here. The final scene of that week came on a Sunday morning show. The host replayed Jasmine's words. "Those people outside aren't disrupting democracy. They are democracy." Then he looked straight into the camera and said, "Maybe we all needed that reminder." Millions of viewers nodded silently at home. Because they did. We all did. And in the end, that's what Jasmine Crockett's moment was really about. Not politics, not parties, not power, but a promise. The promise that every American, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they believe, still has the right to stand up, speak out and be heard, If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that remind us what courage, truth, and respect look like. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And share this story with someone who believes in using their voice, no matter the cost, because as Jasmine Crockett showed the world, silence never built a democracy. Speaking up did. Would you like me to now comb